We may remember the civil rights movement for Martin Luther King Jr.'s peaceful ideals, but another great leader, Malcolm X, had slightly different methods. As we watch the two speak, focus not only on their power of persuasion, but their diction.
We must not allow our creative protests to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. The marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community must not lead us to a distrust of all white people. For many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied up with our destiny.
Who taught you, please, who taught you to hate the texture of your hair? Who taught you to hate the color of your skin to such extent that you bleach to get like the white man? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose and the shape of your lips? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet? Who taught you to hate your own kind? Who taught you to hate the race that you belong to? So much so that you don't want to be around each other. No, before you come asking Mr. Muhammad, does he teach hate, you should ask yourself, who taught you to hate being what God gave you.
Though many agreed with MLK's peaceful ideas, other blacks joined Malcolm's movement, and though the two had blacks' interests in mind, their goals and approach were very different. Malcolm X accused the black clergymen and their peaceful movement as being a doctrine of cowardice disguised as Christian love. Malcolm belittled the nonviolence movement and the thought of an integrated society, instead preaching black superiority and that blacks should protect themselves by any means necessary, even if it meant bullet for bullet. Malcolm X, for this, became a symbol for the Black Power movement.
Goal of Dr. King is full equality and full rights of citizenship for Negroes.
The goal of Dr. Martin Luther King is to give Negroes a chance to sit in a segregated restaurant beside the same white man who has brutalized them for 400 years. The goal of Dr. Martin Luther King is to get Negroes to forgive the people who have brutalized them for 400 years by lulling them to sleep and making them forgetting what those whites have done to them.
As a child, Malcolm Little grew up with many struggles. His family was abused by the KKK, his house was burned down as white police stood by and watched, and his father was killed by white supremacists. Likewise, Malcolm's dreams of being a lawyer were crushed when his favorite teacher said the goal was unrealistic for someone of his color. These experiences led him to a life of crime, and in 1946, he went to prison for breaking and entering. However, after meeting fellow prisoner Bimby, he learned he could turn his life around. Malcolm Little became very studious and religious, and he dropped his last name Little for X, citing that his real name had been taken away from him when his family was brought to America to be slaves. On good behavior, he was released from prison and went to see Elijah Muhammad, the leader of the Nation of Islam.
I was in prison. I was a very wayward, criminal, backward, illiterate, uneducated, and whatever other negative characteristics you can think of type of person until I heard the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And because of the impact that it had upon me in giving me a desire to reform myself and rehabilitate myself for the first time in my life, and also being able to see the effect that it had upon others, this is what made me accept it. And I noticed that after being exposed to the religious teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, immediately it instilled within me such a high degree of racial pride and racial dignity that I wanted to be somebody, and I realized that I couldn't be anybody by begging the white man for what he had, but that I had to get out here and try and do something for myself or make something out of myself.
The Nation of Islam preached self-defense, black pride, and distrust of and separation from the whites. He joined the Nation of Islam and began to recruit and talk to the black people of Detroit, being able to connect to and deeply affect them due to their similar experiences. And membership tripled after a few months. Malcolm X was soon promoted because of his charisma and public speaking abilities and began traveling around the U.S. In 1957, a black Muslim was severely beaten by policemen in Harlem, and Malcolm organized over 800 to march on the station. But not wanting to start a riot, he ended it with just a flick of his hand. One of the policemen there would note on Malcolm's influence, "No man should have that much power."
How could so few white people rule so many black people? This is the thing you should want to know. How could so few The white man today will tell you that thousands of years ago, the black man in Africa was living in palaces. The black man in Africa was wearing silk. The black man in Africa was cooking and seasoning his food. The black man in Africa had mastered the arts and the sciences. He knew the course of the stars in the universe before the man up in Europe knew that the earth wasn't flat. Is that right or wrong?
I was amazed at his capacity to communicate and at the naked honesty with which he expressed his feelings about black people, about white people. He scared me. I'm sure he intended to. But certainly after I saw him and the hate that hate produced, I knew that I would never forget this man.
Malcolm's presence alone could invoke great passion or overwhelming fear, and there was never a middle ground between the two due to his preachings of black pride and white hatred. Roy Wilkins, the executive secretary of the NAACP, said of Malcolm's ideals, "For years the NAACP has been opposed to white extremists for preaching hatred of Negro people, and we are equally opposed to Negro extremists preaching against white people, simply for the sake of whiteness." In 1961, Malcolm founded the largest black publication to be made, called Muhammad Speaks, and later became the editor. But Malcolm realized that integration or separatism alone could not achieve what he desired. He wanted to take his movement out of the religious boundaries of the nation and into politics. This led to issues between him and Muhammad, for the radical opinions Malcolm were voicing were creating a bad reputation for the nation. As Malcolm's power grew, so did the contention between him and Elijah Muhammad, culminating in Malcolm's expulsion from the nation.